All right, hey, welcome again. We are back for part two
Part two
of
Getting
how, getting up to this 1939, 1940 of Europe. What is going on here? How are we going to deal with this situation of Germany, who is now by 1938, 1939, after the Munich Conference, taking much of this area?
They've accomplished the goal of getting all the ethnic Germans with the weirdos down here in Romania. I don't know how
we
they got
don't.
there.
We're not going to talk about them.
But all the ethnic Germans that he could safely get into German territory, it's done.
Right. Austria.
Done.
Annexed through democratic ways. Now, were they
Probably.
fully democratic?
Probably more of a coup, really.
Yeah.
That'd probably be the best way to call it, because it's not an invasion, really, because there's no resistance.
No, there's not a resistance movement. And again, the same thing happening here in around the area of Prague, which is, of course, the Sudetenland. Again, you see that with the Munich Conference in March of 38, 9?
March, the Munich Conference is September of 38.
That's right. September 38, you see, of course, Mussolini bringing them all together, saying, hey, let's have a big party and divvy up some things.
Oh, yeah, we didn't mention that last time. Mussolini got squat.
Yeah, of course, of course. He wanted to have, again, the idea of that connecting point between Libya and Ethiopia.
Not going to happen.
But Chamberlain and the British say,
Did you say Egypt?
Did you mean to maybe not even talk about that? But of course, Daladier and Chamberlain, they come away from this as
heroes.
Yeah.
I mean,
Chamberlain's
just upfront about it. He waves the papers in the air and says, we have peace in our time.
Of course, that's not really.
Mr. Hitler has guaranteed. I love when it just seems funny to hear him referred to as Mr. Hitler.
Yeah, right? Mr. Hitler.
Yes. And Daladier, however, flies home and he sees the crowd at the airport. I can't remember. It's Charles de Gaulle now, but it wouldn't have been named that day.
No, I couldn't tell you exactly what it is now, but
maybe Orly. Anyway, he actually has the pilot circle the airfield because he is afraid that the crowd that is gathered there is there to lynch him. He feels so guilty about what they've done to their ally. They've been allies with Czechoslovakia for 17 or 18 years.
Could you blame the guy for feeling that way after you just literally handed your ally a death notice?
I think it would have been a weird, because I can't imagine how he would have felt after he realizes the crowd is cheerful because they're not going to have to go to war over Czechoslovakia.
That is a good point.
But how does he, because he already feels guilty about it, and then they're cheering him on. That's probably something he took to his grave.
I'm sure it probably was something that would definitely eat him alive over time, because knowing what you did and then just understanding that the people of your country are okay with it.
They're not just okay. Awesome. They're just
ecstatic.
Over the moon.
Right.
We're not going to have to fight a war, because remember, France, of course, bore the burden of World War I.
They did.
On the Allied side, they lost so many millions, and it messed their country up in so many ways that they still felt a whole generation later.
And it's true. It's true.
But there it is. Hitler got his chunk, and then you would assume he would just stop and
smell the roses?
Oh, and just enjoy the PR victory of all these wonderful diplomatic moves. He's got a resume now as a foreign policy guy.
Not just domestic.
Yeah, he's not just building Volkswagens and having an Autobahn for them. He is in putting people to work.
He's providing an area for people to now who are not so-called said German as a nationality in terms of political means, but now they are.
Yes. Ein Volk, ein Deutschland, ein Führer.
Right.
One people, one nation, one leader. It's done. He's accomplished his stated publicly goal.
Right. This is the last territorial demand I have to make in Europe.
Yes.
That's not how it goes, though.
Maury Povich goes, oh, our evidence says it's false.
Czechoslovakia, meet your new father.
Yes, because that's his next target. A very well-developed, well-educated country right on his border that would increase his economic output.
Again, like we mentioned off camera, these people are not just building outhouses and are farmers. These people are very much educated. They have people from this area of Czechoslovakia around Prague, who are very well known in the community of science and literature and psychology, sociology, all of these major new forms of science. And then, of course, as you move further closer to about the middle, it's starting to become, again, this industrialization. You're in that plains region. Am I correct?
It's a lot more conducive to farming, and the Slovaks are a lot more farming people than the Czechs.
Sure.
And we got to remember, this is an art. This again is like Hitler would rail against, an artificial country created by Versailles.
Right. The Czechs on one side,
Slovaks
on the other.
We see the same thing with Yugoslavia.
Yes, and
the Croats and the Serbs and the Slovenes and the Montenegrins and the Bosnians and the Macedonians, and I'm not even sure who else.
You name it, they're there.
They're there.
The large Slavic region that they wanted even before World War I. So they finally got it, but again, that's a story for another day. What we do see again is Hitler wants it. He wants the Czech area of Czechoslovakia.
Right. It's strategically, it's a wonderful. It helps outflank where the Polish army is. Not to spoil anything, but that's the next target.
Yeah.
Also, Slovakia has a very large pro-German Nazi guy kind of running around.
So puppet government.
So we can establish puppet government just like we did in Austria.
Yeah, and you think about it again. You now already have taken Austria. You have a friend with Admiral, what's his name again? Horthy. Admiral Horthy, again, the landlocked
Country with an admiral.
Whatever. But you have a friend here in Admiral Horthy. You have this puppet here in Slovakia, and of course Romania. Mm-hmm. Romania is becoming more of an ally because, again, brother bear of the Soviet Union, who is, well, not the best. They take, like we mentioned, Moldova.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know if they've gotten it yet. I can't remember.
But eventually they will.
They've been agitating ever since Hitler started his thing. Stalin was like,
"Hey,
that's a great idea.
I can do that." And so they start to poke it. They start to get a little more. And
Romania doesn't have any friends.
No.
They used to have an ally called France, but they realized real quickly that's done.
The French they're not wanting to get into entanglements as much because, again, they had such a disaster of World War I.
Well, if you're Romania, you've watched the Rhineland in 1937.
Yeah.
36.
Austria in 36.
Austria in 1938.
Yeah.
Early 1938, and then Sudetenland in 1938, and you're like, these guys aren't they're not going to go to war for Czechoslovakia, who I know they like better and they're closer.
They're sure as heck not going to go with me.
They're not going to fight Russia for me.
Oh, heck no.
So I need to find a different ally. And really, when you're casting about by allies, there's very few choices. You've got Mussi in Italy, and that's not going to be very attractive. So Hitler's the guy, especially after the series of victories diplomatically, where he literally got France and Britain to give him the Sudetenland.
Right, that's huge. That's huge.
I mean, when you can beat your opponent, it's awesome. When you can get your opponent to give you what you want without a fight, it's even better.
Yeah. And so now we see, again, by the end of 1939, we are up.
But end of 1938.
Beginning of 1938. Sorry, there you go. End of 1938, beginning of 1939, we are up to a huge, huge territorial expansion.
Well, Germany. Germany's going to take Czechoslovakia. He does the same approach as he does to
Austria.
President Hacha, who replaced Benez, who kind of lost the election or whatever after the Munich conference.
Forced whatever.
I mean, possibly the first guy who lost his job because the other guys wouldn't pick up their phone. But anyway, he starts the same browbeating. I'm going to invade if you don't give me X, Y, and Z, which amounts to giving me your country one way or the other.
Well, you never want to have an invasion force, especially one that you have no way of protecting
Right.
yourself.
You've lost your defensive. All the fortifications you sunk money into over the last decade are gone.
Right.
Your army realizes that it can't fight, so they just basically they have to give up.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine how fearful, how just utterly depressing and frustrating it must have been to be in the Czech leadership at this time. You can't do anything to save your country, and you know it. You just know there's no way to win. There's no allies, because you're not going to go to Joe Stalin over there.
Oh no.
The French and the British have already told you they don't care, in no uncertain terms.
And so you're really between a rock and a hard place.
So when we talk about just war theory, one of the things that gets put forward in that is you shouldn't fight a war you cannot win.
And this is definitely
And
not
this
one.
is definitely one. The Czechs choose surrender.
And I don't blame them.
And again, what could they have done? There's really not much they could have done.
Well, and who knows? Maybe
Die in mass.
It's you take one in one hand of I fight and I might be remembered, and then you take it in the other hand and you say Hitler might be okay with us.
Yeah, I guess, and then on the fight side is how much of my country is destroyed in the process.
True.
Whereas I still have hope for my wife, my family, my mom, my dad,
Right.
that they might survive this war.
And you got to think about it as well. With this being a very industrialized area, they're going to start outputting a huge military force.
Oh yeah.
Eventually.
I mean, the Czech army was no sneezer. They used mostly French equipment, but they built a lot of it themselves.
Sure.
And so, under license. But
Yeah.
so Czechoslovakia is gone. Slovakia is now there under their little puppet government. Hungary gets a couple little pieces.
But again, we now are seeing the buildup.
And really the biggest thing that comes out of the annexation of Czechoslovakia is that the Allies no longer believe Hitler. And they both France and Great Britain begin to build up for war. And a weirdly unknown backbencher who used to be the Secretary of the Navy, or
Assistant
the,
Secretary, Undersecretary.
Undersecretary, or Under Minister, whatever they
Whatever
call it.
they call it. Eventually the Assistant of the Navy.
Yes. Anyway, the guy who came up with Gallipoli,
Mm-hmm.
Winston Churchill, that backbencher who's been beating the drum that Hitler's a bad guy since 1933, is suddenly coming to the forefront of the conservative or Tory party.
Right.
In giving Neville Chamberlain no end of grief.
And he just continues to fight against, just constantly talking about Neville Chamberlain.
Yes,
Appeasement. Hitler.
Appeasement. That's the word that comes out, and we see it. We just saw it. All those activities, but then Germany turns to the east, the Lebensraum that Hitler has promised the German people, which to me is an interesting facet of Nazi ideology, for lack of a better word, almost theology.
Right.
That they are an industrialized nation,
Mhm.
probably 75 to 80% urban at this point in history.
Mhm.
They're a very urban nation. They are an industrial power because they're an urban nation,
Sure.
or vice versa. One or the other, I don't know, chicken egg.
Yeah. Right.
But Hitler's dream that he casts out to these German people is almost a repeat of the Prussian autocracy. The concept that even average Germans would be able to have a farm in the east where they have this room. And this comes back again when we talk about the Soviet Union and the Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, Poland is a very agricultural nation. They've got a lot of raw materials, steel and iron and,
Sure,
iron,
sure.
iron and coal and things like that. But overall, it's not a very advanced nation. I mean, as we'll see in the invasion, where horsebacks get used in combat as opposed to just pulling artillery or supplies.
Well, what are you going to do?
Right. Well, you don't have it. You don't have
Well,
the money. You don't have the resources to do anything better.
You realize again, though, is this is another one of those artificial nations.
I mean,
Yes, they have ethnic Poles.
yes, there are Poles all over the place.
There are Poles all over the place, but again, they were not a nation before 1914.
1919 or whatever.
Well,
but they
yes,
were
you're right.
they were a nation for a brief period of time. The Grand Duchy of Warsaw was a nation.
Well,
They're very much like Germany. When Germany counts, this is the Third Reich we're talking about.
Sure, yeah.
We talk about the Zweite Reich, which was Bismarck and the unified Germany that dies in World War I. And then the First Reich, which is all the way back to Charlemagne.
Right, and the
Carolingian
Holy Roman Emperor.
Yes, the Holy Roman Empire. Poland's kind of the same way. It's this area around Warsaw, basically this little triangle, Krakow, Warsaw, and to Lublin for sure. That area has always been Polish.
Right.
It's the areas around the outside that keep moving back and forth, depending on who won the last big war.
Sure.
Whether the border shifts to the west or to the east.
Again, like after 1919 with the Treaty of Versailles, you see now this division between Germany and East Prussia with the Danzig corridor. And the idea of, well, what are we going to do about that? You literally separate a whole area of Germany from Germany proper, and they're looking for blood.
And especially for the German generals, so many of them, especially anybody who had the last name that starts with a von Stauffenberg, von Ribbentrop, von whatever, they're Prussian by birth, typically. They're that nobility. And that's their homeland around Königsberg. But the Allies, after World War I, saw that they had to create a seaport that allowed them to get to Poland, and by extension Czechoslovakia, Hungary, all those other nations they created.
Yeah.
In case Germany became powerful again, surprise, that they would have access. I'm not sure how they thought they were just going to slip by the Germans there right along their northern coast, but well, I'm not sure. We couldn't do anything about it. We could build a bridge all the way to London or something. But, you know, it causes, again, here we go, Hitler has his excuse. Danzig itself is a German city. Even at this point, it's 80% German.
Right.
And the area around it is predominantly ethnic Germans. And of course, it splits my country in half.
Well, I need it.
Well, not half, but
well,
you know,
I'm sure that's a part. It takes a part of my country away, so I must have it.
Yes.
It's mine. Give it back to me.
So he starts the push.
Yes, of course he does. And again, that push is very powerful. It's right up everyone's alley.
At the end of March, after the whole fiasco with Czechoslovakia, Britain signs a treaty. A mutual defense treaty with Poland. So this ups the game.
They have a chip.
Yeah, now if Britain backs out, they stand to lose a lot of credibility in the world, and that's not something they can.
Well, when you have
with this empire that is ramshackle in a lot of ways,
it is starting to become a crumbling.
Gandhi's running around. Yeah. You got all these things going on. The idea that you would lose that much face. I mean, I know face is more of a Eastern Asian thing, but it really applies in diplomacy no matter what era you're in. This idea that you have your reputation as a nation on this treaty. Now, the French obviously didn't care. They just sold Czechoslovakia down the river.
Yeah.
And now, you know, Poland's like, okay, but now Britain doesn't usually do alliances.
Yes,
especially not written stuff.
No, they typically stay out of that whole.
And so, I think Poland feels pretty much better about the concept that this great power is another great power.
I know I would.
I know I
would.
We feel good.
Yes, and so, but here's the deal. Germany has already taken quite a bit of land, and they've already started their propaganda.
Oh yeah, they're beating the drum about the ethnic Germans again.
And where do you go from here?
Well, you realize that the Allies have made Poland part of the alliance in an obvious move to tell you don't go any further. But Hitler has an end run.
Right.
He goes to the one place that the British and the French never even suspected was a possibility. And on the 24th of August signs a treaty with Joe Stalin.
Now, the thing about this treaty, let's put this into perspective. It is called the Non-Aggression Pact.
Yes.
Now, again,
the public name.
Yeah. The backroom deal was we're going to split Poland.
Yes.
And Germany will take the western half. Russia, Soviet Union, you take the eastern half. And
the Germans agree to give the Soviet Union carte blanche in dealing with the Baltic states,
There you
which
go.
are typically, especially the Lithuanians,
Right.
tend to lean very German.
But again,
But I mean, what's Hitler care about a bunch of Lithuanians?
he doesn't matter to him. Heck, he's getting back his Danzig. He's getting back his East Prussia. He's happy. He's like a hog in crap. At this point.
And he's crushing the Untermenschen, the Slavic Poles.
Right. So.
Which he doesn't mention too much because he just made an ally.
Right.
With a bunch of other
Right.
But we know from his other writings that's what he considers them.
So by the middle part of 39,
it's fairly obvious Hitler's going to make the move. Everybody keeps hoping. Well, I mean, we get to August. Really, at August 23rd, everybody thought this alliance with Poland has put him in check. Yes, he's started up his rhetoric, but he's not going to push that button.
No.
He's not going to go to war with France and Great Britain for Danzig.
Of course not.
That just seems silly on the face of it. Well, if you're a Frenchman, that does seem silly.
Yeah.
Because you don't care about Danzig. You don't even know where Danzig is.
You don't want to know. You've got your own problems to worry about in France.
Right. But Hitler, with that alliance, the world, I mean, that was a big, one of those gigantic 100 font on the front of the newspaper.
You're like, holy crap.
Soviet Union and Germany have signed a treaty of non-aggression. Well, that was the great hope, is that eventually Hitler would get too big for his britches and Russia would fade, because then they wouldn't have to.
Right.
Because, everybody in Europe thought Russia was too big to fight.
They were wrong.
Well, might be too big to win, but not too big to fight.
No, you're right. And so
Hitler, the next week is basically the troops are moving into position secretly. Hitler is very good at secrecy. For some, well, of course, then again, you got the Gestapo smacking down anybody who blabs. And you have a country that has been Nazi for 6 years.
Right.
So literally everybody who was a teenager or above has been indoctrinated as a Nazi. Hitler is the Fuhrer. He's always right, and the last 4 or 5 years have proved it.
And he's improved. He's improved their lives tenfold.
And it's just, and especially for younger people, the pride, the national pride of getting Austria and the Rhineland back and Czechoslovakia. It's just, oh my goodness, we're all that.
And a bag of chips. And let's keep it rolling.
Let's keep it rolling. And so on the night of August 31st, the Poles attack a radio transmitter on the east side near Breslau. And I'm like, well, that doesn't even make sense to anybody. That's why nobody usually mentions it. Hitler invades Poland on September 1st.
Yes.
And this is where we learn a new word, blitzkrieg.
Lightning war.
Yes, literally lightning war, fashioned into an actual workable system by Heinz Guderian, but it was based off writings from 2 British guys, J.F.C. Fuller and Little Hart. These 2 guys, Little Hart has some more initials too, but I forget.
It is what it is.
It is what it is. But anyway, these guys had written about armored warfare after World War I because they saw the potential in tanks, the concept, Little Hart especially, the concept of a mechanized spear. I mean, his looking, well, we'll see an army that's built just like Little Hart imagined, but it isn't the German army.
No.
The German army tries, but they just don't have the material to become a purely mechanized army. I know the images we see from the wars, always the tanks and the half-tracks and stuff, and it seems like they're great. But the Germans use horses for almost all their supplies, their artillery.
They just didn't have
the very tip of the spear was mechanized.
They just did not have the full bore of a mechanized army, which in a roundabout way, when it's 1939, you don't really care so much about your back supplies. You care more about how in the world are you going to penetrate an opposing army's infantry and expose that openness behind enemy lines.
Yes, I mean, because that was all of World War I. If anybody could have gotten a breakthrough, the war would have changed.
Sure.
But the front was too deep to beat it with infantry.
You
or
had
tanks that moved the same speed as infantry, and then broke down after a mile.
As you notice, of course, by 39, you saw some of the improvements in the tanks, the quickness, the short burst of fire that these tanks had. You know, they were booking it. They were going 30, 40 miles an hour.
I know, which was terrifying at the time.
You see a little and coming down at you. You're like, holy crap! Get out of the way! Get out of the way!
And German tanks were typically built for speed. A lot of the tanks had been developed in the 20s before Hitler was even running any part of the government.
Yeah.
The Germans were doing exercises in the Western Soviet Union out on the plains.
Because of where they were located.
Because they could keep it secret from the Western powers. Because
Exactly.
they weren't allowed to have tanks.
Right. So
based on the Treaty of Versailles.
they go elsewhere.
But Heinz Guderian, especially in the 30s, develops this concept of lightning war. Two reasons. One, the concept that you could plow through, just punch a hole. Once you get troops on the backside of the line, everybody on the line is scared now. They're looking over their shoulder.
Well,
they're terrified.
Right.
And armies break when they're pushed out of position that they feel like they can hold. If you got a guy sitting in a line and he knows the guy to the left and the right of him is okay and everybody's in their place, fine. But if the guy on the right suddenly disappears,
you're screwed.
Run away is a very good battle cry.
Yeah.
Because you don't know what's going on.
Right.
And it's very difficult to maintain morale under that kind of pressure. And of course the Germans build their air force around this concept too. That they don't build these great big bombers like Britain and the United States
Oh no,
do.
they have these small, fierce, almost as if it was like a hornet, just barreling down at you.
And they developed these dive bombers. The Stuka, the Ju-87 Stuka, was advanced for his time. It had these flaps that came out that would slow its dive, allowing the pilot to be very steady and aim and drop a bomb on a target. Not just in an area,
precision
but
targeting.
onto a headquarters, onto a communications antenna. Anything to disrupt the ability of the opponent to fight back. Blowing up their generals or taking out their radios is a real good start.
Yeah.
And their air force was all short-ranged because they didn't worry about, they weren't thinking like the United States is, how do I bomb Japan from California? And the British, how do I get a plane from here to India?
Right. We don't really care so much as a German military because, again, we don't have the need.
Our targets are close.
Right.
Our targets are very close. And here they go. I mean, when they punch through, they come up from the south, they come in from the north, from East Prussia, they come in this way, and they encircle. They punch through these lines, and they encircle. And you have occasions when Polish cavalry would come out and fight tanks with machine guns on them. Now, the first German tanks, the Panzer IIs, not that impressive, really, compared to French and British tanks. They were kind of weeny. They were fast. And they had machine guns, which, if you're fighting horses, it's a win every time.
Right.
But it's literally, they were kind of at the edge of the end of the lifespan of the Panzer IIs they were going into Poland with. And so when they go into France, the Panzer IIIs are out, and the Panzer IIs have become scouts, light tanks.
Yes.
And the Panzer IIIs, which are a much more effective vehicle. And the Germans modify these things over and over and over again. Panzer III, I think, goes up to a G model, maybe an H. I'm not even sure. I can't remember now. Panzer II goes all the way to an F or a G. I mean, they are modifying these things all the time, which, of course, is a difficulty because it slows down production.
Yeah.
Because you have to stop, retool, do it again. Now, sometimes the difference is a different kind of machine gun on top, and that doesn't really stop your factory. But when you put a new engine in,
that totally
now you're building
everything.
a whole new engine. And we see that just as a continuous theme in the Third Reich, that desire for the next coolest, bestest thing.
Right.
Kind of slows down their, it takes away some of their industrial advantage.
Yeah.
We won't see that effect until 43, 44. And against Poland, we don't see it at all. 6 weeks, this is over. Really, 2 weeks, it's pretty much over. And 2 weeks later, the Soviet Union invades Poland. Something people always fail to mention when I'm watching like documentaries and stuff. They're just always like, it's just like all of a sudden the map turns red on that side. You're like, really?
How in the heck does that happen? That's weird.
Did all the Polish people become communist Russians?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that must have been it. But and this drove Churchill up a wall because he is a consistent anti-communist. Period.
Yeah.
If you want to pick anything else to call him, you may be right, may not be right, depending on the time frame. But anti-communist, you're good all the time.
Right.
As long as there's been communists, he doesn't like them. So again, it gives him something else to badger Chamberlain about. Because here, this ally we've just created is gone.
Right.
September 3rd, so 2 days into it, France and Britain declare war. World War II, the official, what we consider the start of the real war, despite the fact that Japanese have been fighting in China for 2 years already.
Exactly.
But that's a colonial war, really, is I think how the British see it.
And again, it's not an overarching invasion of major powers. China's a backwater nation, but when you talk here in Europe,
yeah, now we're talking.
Things get really.
You have 3 of the major powers of the world are now at war with each other.
Right.
And it goes. I mean, the reports from the front that the British get back are terrifying.
Of course.
These armored units are going slicing through there, and it's so fast the Polish don't even know what to do because they're mostly an infantry army.
Right.
When you got a tank that's moving, even when they're only moving 20 to 25 miles an hour, they can sustain that for 4 or 5 hours. That's 100 miles. It takes a long time to walk 100 miles.
It does. It does.
But even if you assume they only drive for an hour, that's more than a day's walk for most armies.
Exactly.
And you can do it again tomorrow, or after you gas up.
Right.
And another reason for blitzkrieg, though, if you can defeat your enemy quickly, that whole supply chain doesn't matter.
Yeah. You don't have to resupply. You don't have to refuel. You can just
you go, you accomplish your mission, you break the
stop.
enemy, and you move, and you stop, and then you resupply, and then you do it again if you need to.
Right. But
penetrate the enemy, encircle the enemy, and crush them, resupply,
move
repeat
on
if necessary.
Right. It's a simple, easy task of trying to win a war, and especially against a group of people who are
fighting the last war.
Yeah.
Which unfortunately the Poles definitely are.
Mm-hmm.
And the French and the British, when we talk about 1940, don't look a whole lot different. All spiffy new equipment.
But they're still using the same tactics.
And the interesting thing is, all over Europe right now, they're all shooting at each other with the same rifles their dads took to war. Bolt action rifles with 5 to 10 shot magazine. German's rifles, a Mauser 98K.
Mm-hmm.
It's got a 5-shot magazine, a weird lever. I mean, it's easy to grab, but it's kind of strange as far as efficiency.
Right.
Which you expect the Germans to be a little bit more efficient, but no, they weren't. British are using Lee Enfield. The French are using what is it? No, that's Russian. I can't remember the name of their rifle, but it's the same one.
Right.
Literally, maybe it's got updated, maybe it has a new sight on it, but it's got the same magazine capacity,
and it's still the same bolt action.
Bolt action, which means yes, your rate of fire compared to Napoleon's army is amazing.
Yeah, but when you're fighting again,
when you're trying to fight a horde of people,
it doesn't work so well.
Nothing replaces automatic weapons, and of course, the Germans have really done a good job of putting a lot of automatic weapons on their tanks. So when they run through an area full of infantry, it's like a dragon spitting fire everywhere.
Right.
You've got at least 2 guys inside shooting at you with that, and then on possibly the commander up top with his machine gun.
Exactly.
3 machine guns, that's a traveling castle. For World War I.
Yeah.
Comparison. It's just, and of course they're moving at higher speeds.
Exactly.
Even if it is only 20, 25 miles an hour.
That's quadruple the speed that it was in World War I.
Yes, where it was walking speed at best.
Right.
Which is what, 3 to 4 miles an hour?
Mm-hmm.
The Polish were brave, we can say that, but they were hopelessly outclassed.
Of course.
It's literally, the San Francisco 49ers taking on a Pee Wee football league. Yep. They just didn't have a chance. Which of course the Czechs who decided not to fight are like, whoo, dodged a bullet there, didn't we?
Yes.
And then nothing. Poland is crushed. Russia takes over eastern Poland. Nazis take over western Poland and start removing people.
Mm-hmm.
Usually in trucks at this point.
Right.
They literally would put them in a trailer behind a truck and drive around and put carbon monoxide into the trailer.
Yep, taking them straight from the exhaust pipe into
10
the
to
tank.
12 at a time. That takes a long time to empty a ghetto, which ghettos were already pretty much there because the Poles didn't like the Jews either.
No.
But then we have Sitzkrieg, which is a term the British make up because, of course, the British are clever with words.
Of course.
And they realize that for the next 5 months, 6 months. Well, by the end of by October, it's over.
Right.
So October, November, December, January, February, March, April.
7 months.
7 months.
6, 7 months.
Nothing really happened. Now, in the air, the British try some bombing raids. In the daytime, they get slaughtered, so they move to nighttime bombing.
Mm-hmm.
But they have these big bombers. The Wellingtons are big, powerful bombers, and they can reach Germany without a problem. They're just slow, and they're not very well defended.
I don't know how to respond.
I don't care.
Yeah. So 1939, which in the middle got really exciting with lots of firepower and stuff, kind of glides to an end.
And it ultimately comes to
in the United States, the Neutrality Acts start becoming obsolete.
Yes.
As FDR, no matter what else you think of him, he definitely had the foresight to see this war was coming to America,
Right.
whether we wanted it to
one way
not.
or another, it was going to hit us.
It was going to get us. Either we were going to be doing like we did in World War I, supplying the French and the British,
Or we were actually going
or
to fight.
we were going to have to fight, which of course is exactly how World War I ended.
Right.
I can't imagine his reports too of the Germans go through Poland, basically 2 weeks, 6 weeks maximum, and that's a whole country swallowed up.
Yes.
We don't see that kind of expansive conquering until the drive to the east.
You're right.
Coming 2 years later. I mean, just the amount of movement that takes. These tanks, despite the fact that they are much more modern, of course, than World War I, they're good tanks, but they're still tanks, and tanks are finicky. They throw treads, they burn out engines, they throw springs. There's a number of things that kill a tank. And even if you don't kill all the tanks, if you kill 2 or 3 out of a company, suddenly your company is a platoon.
Right.
And you're just not that powerful anymore.
Exactly. So it definitely does put a damper on some of those Germans.
Well, it puts a limit to how far can we go.
Right.
Before we have to stop and really fix our stuff.
Right.
Because we can't afford it. We need new treads. We need new sprockets. We need all these cool
Whatever
things.
the case may be.
We need all those cool things that the Czechs and the Austrians can build for us.
Right. And I think that's a good place for us to kind of
Yes, it
wind down and explain, hey, this is real.
It's
This
war
is,
now.
This is now. Nobody's just taking my play toys and going home. They're literally killing and taking over other nations.
Despite the great victory, 17,000 Germans were killed in the
Oof.
invasion of Poland. So it wasn't
Wow.
like the Poles just rolled over. They fought.
They
fought hard.
They are. They tried their best, and
It just, again,
just
they
wasn't
were
the
going
best
up
they
against the
could.
varsity.
Yeah.
And they just weren't ready, and they didn't have the size, let alone the material.
right.
So,
Right.
but
So,
yes, we're at war.
and soon enough, the U.S. will be there eventually.
Yeah, we got a couple countries to conquer first.
Right. Yeah, definitely. So anyway, again, make sure you tune in next time, and we are going to continue looking here how the French, how the British, they deal with it. So,
Yes, and we'll talk about 1940. We'll start moving forward again when we talk about them. But part of our goal is to been cut down our length to make it more digestible for you at home.
yes.
Our goal was to get down to 30 minutes. We're going to have to struggle real hard.
Yeah.
But we're working.
We're getting there.
We're cutting 20 to 30 minutes off every time. So we feel good about that. But again, questions, comments, put them in there. Text us, email us, something.
Yeah, something,
If
whatever.
you don't know who we are, use
Find us.
YouTube. Find
Yes.
us. In AJ History Productions on YouTube. If somebody just shared this with you and you can't figure it out, but we're doing this because we love it.
Right.
And we want to share it with you. And so if you have something that maybe we skipped over something you were really fascinated by, put it in the comments. Let us know. Let's have that discussion in the comments and
Yeah.
talk about things. Because if there's something I know for growing up in America, World War II brings out pretty much every history nerd.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, I was much more of a early modern, 30 years war, Reformation guy. I still, every chance I get, I watch something on not so much the History Channel because they don't show history anymore.
But World
you know
War
what I mean.
II era.
World War II documentaries, I'm
There
hooked.
you go.
I'll watch even bad ones.
Hey, take care.
Yep.